A man was shot dead by police in Derby after being spotted carrying a knife in a secure car park at Ascot Drive police station. Here's what we know so far. He was a 35-year-old Romanian national called Marius Cholak. He lived on Osmaston Road behind the police station. It's emerged he was facing a court hearing for assault by beating. The police watchdog, the IOPC, is continuing to investigate how it came to be that he was shot dead. Harry Tangye is a former armed response sergeant, now retired from the force, and he's written his memoirs in a book called Firearms and Fatals, and he joins us now. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Andy. How are you?
Yes, I'm all right, thank you. And this story is obviously, you don't want to go into the details of this particular story, but we don't know exactly what happened. There is an investigation going on. But what happens, Harry, when armed officers do get a call to an incident like this?
Yeah, we can talk generically, can't we? Because so the control room would get a call that there's an incident going on, and the tactical firearms commander within the police force, and in some forces they're in the control room, and in some they're extremely very quickly on call and they're got hold of, and they'll assess all the information and intelligence coming in, and they will quickly assess to see whether at what level it is and whether they can authorize armed officers. I mean, sometimes calls come in and it's one call and it's from a child's voice and it's saying that there's mass shooting or something. Then they won't ignore it by any means, but they'll look at it and send units. But on another call, when it's very clear, when you've got a multiple number of calls coming in about the same location, that there's something quite serious going on, and then armed response vehicles will be dispatched, and they will be in every force. They are readily available now.
So what are your options then when faced with somebody with a weapon?
Well, first of all, to get into the armed response, you have to have been quite an experienced police officer, at least done a few years in the job. You're then picked through a very because not everyone wants to do that sort of job. There's no extra money for it. You do then a 13-week very intensive course, which involves vehicle interceptions, building searches, it's open ground searches. Do you know what? A massive part of it is assessing. And it's assessing whether it's an ongoing terrorist incident where you have to act very decisively and really at the top scale, perhaps, and whether that's someone who's autistic, who is just not getting the communication right. So, okay, let's stop shouting and screaming and challenging. Let's bring it right down and then see if that works. And you can only do that if it's safe to do so. If someone's charging at you with a knife, that's not an option. But if you've contained something, because you're going to try to identify the person, locate them, contain them, and then neutralize the threat. So contain them, you can either do it visually, or you hopefully can do it physically, in which case you can talk to them and negotiate them all day. There's no rush to go in there. Now, this is what, and also every 6 weeks, there'll be four full-on days with the assessments, again, that these armed response officers are getting.
Will police try to use taser rubber bullets first then?
Yes, so if they're authorised, so you keep a lot of weapons in the armoury in the vehicle, the larger ones, because you can't all walk around with these. But one of these is a baton gun, AEP, which is they call less lethal. It's a bit like a heavyweight boxer hitting you in the stomach, and that's pretty much where they're aiming. They're aiming for the buckle belt. That is only available if you can get to it, if it's authorised. Otherwise, officers have a self-defence weapon, a Glock, a pistol that everyone knows, attached to them. So if they've got time, the baton gun's a very good tool for giving time. And often I found if someone's got a knife, they're aggressive with a knife, and it got to a stage, it was a baton gun, then you can go up and tase them. However, a lot of options aren't available like that, because I think if you remember in the Lee Rigby situation in London, the officers arrived, were out of the car and had to act straight away. There's no time for the baton gun at all.
Is that, what about the taser then?
Yeah, the taser is, I did a blog on this because there's a lot of misconception. is with the taser. There's two barbs that come out. You need to have a full circuit, so you need to have both barbs. It needs to be a nice, good enough spread. Otherwise, you only get a pain factor. You don't get the bit, where you see them falling like a felled tree, where there's very little injury to them, and they're not injured at all. 1 second later, they can get up and that's fine. But if somebody's running at me with a knife, if that's the case, and I'm not going to choose the taser because I'm not going to bet my life that my two barbs are going to go in, that he's not got too thicker clothing, that the taser is going to make that perfect circuit. And I'm just going to be hoping that he doesn't come up and get upon me and stab me in the meantime.
Harry,
it would have to be the Glock.
Harry, why do they shoot to kill? Why don't they shoot at limbs, shoulders, or legs to disable them, and then you can contain them? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, it's a common question, and I can easily answer this. Is because if we put anyone in a range, and we had a mobile target, which included things the size of legs and things. It's much more difficult than we see on the films. And what you would get is 9 times out of 10, you'd miss the legs. My other argument would be, if you're shooting legs and arms, then there's no reason why you should be shooting in the first place. Shooting is a last resort. They're literally on top of you, or they're on top of somebody else, just about. And if you shoot their legs or arms, there's no reason why they can't carry on what they're doing. And you're not going to rely on the fact it's going to put them off a little bit. So that's just not going to be effective. They shoot to stop, and people think this is just a quick, being a little bit sly and not getting to the truth. No, we shoot to stop. It's the biggest mass, it has vital organs, and it's the most likely to stop someone from doing what they're doing. And then you'll notice that armed response officers are some of the most highest trained first aid trained people in the force, much more trained than on the front line response. They will have oropharyngeal airways, they'll have blood clotting agents, oxygen, huge amounts of swabs. So they're very useful with, say, for road accidents, stabbings, shootings, that sort of thing. Armed response are phenomenally well trained in first aid. So it's not shoot to kill, because they're immediately trying to save their lives literally seconds afterwards as well.
Is it the officer's response? Did they make the call, or is there somebody with an earpiece saying, kind of, discharge?
No, it's absolutely down to the officer at the time. They are responsible for whether they pull the trigger or not. And if you think about it, these officers, for no extra pay, with all the stresses that they have with policing as it is, have to make that decision. It's the most responsible decision you could probably have in the whole country, whether to take someone's life or not.
So they make the decision, but so they discharge, and unfortunately, the person, it's a fatality.
Yeah.
But what about the aftercare for the officer as well? Because you've just killed somebody, Harry.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been in a situation twice where literally, shall I say, the slack was taken up on the trigger that I had, and it was only a question of whether he actually raised it a few more inches towards me, whether I was going to have a 6-week inquest with the country's best barristers, looking in microscopically into my 2 seconds of decision making. It is extremely stressful. So there is a post-incident procedure. And those officers will have someone that they can trust and know that will be a liaison between them and the investigation. And that person they can trust will be trained in the fact that it's very important to facilitate the inquiry, but with the welfare of the officers in mind, because in the past they were treated like murder suspects. They were left in bloodstained clothes for multiple hours. They were left up. They were awake. If something usually happens at the end of a night shift, for example, as in the past, then they've got 36 hours sat in their clothing. They demanded to have blood tests from them, and it was atrocious. So there are systems brought in to have a very uniformed across the country way of dealing with things, that we need to get to the truth. The investigation team needs to have basic information that they can work from. without officers, because police officers typically want to talk too much, too early, and they're not in the right state of mind to do so.
Harry,
and lawyers can take advantage of that.
did you ever have to fire your weapon?
No, I didn't, fortunately, and I'm so glad. And I don't know one officer who would want to. But I did notice that when I almost had to, and I mentioned that in the book very much, because people are really interested in what goes through your mind. There are so many assessments. It all comes from college and policing. It's the thing they do really well is that the police officers in Devon and Cornwall are trained as much as the ones in Metropolitan Police, as in Derby, as in Manchester or whatever. Exactly the same. And they go through the same hours of training for each specific mode. And I knew, and I realized this is just like a training scenario. You don't take it flippantly, but you know exactly where you are. I know what to do at the next stage. And I did not think of the next 6 weeks worth of inquest. It didn't enter my mind.
Great to speak to you. Thank you ever so much for coming on. I really do appreciate your time. That's Harry Tangye there, who's a former armed response sergeant and tactical firearms advisor. Time-wise,